Hey folks, I'm brownbear. This is the final entry in an 8-part design commentary series on competitive StarCraft II. If you missed the previous parts, I recommend you watch them before watching this video. For clarity's sake, anytime you hear the word StarCraft, I mean StarCraft II. If I'm referencing Brood War, I'll just call it Brood War. Finally, I recommend that you watch this video from beginning to end. However, for the convenience of folks who prefer to jump around, I've provided timestamps to major talking points in the description below. I remember I promised a deeper discussion of StarCraft's network architecture, so I figure now's a good time. Most real-time strategy games use a networking architecture called Lockstep Simulation. This means that every client runs the entire simulation more or less simultaneously. If one client falls too far behind, the other clients need to wait for it to catch up. This is why the entire game pauses when someone loses their connection, even an observer. Presumably this could be optimized by relegating observers to something like a relay server, which would enable the game to keep going even if an observer drops off. That would also be an important first step to building something like a watch tab within the game client. One of the big benefits of the Lockstep architecture is limited bandwidth utilization. The original Lockstep paper was written assuming a 28.8K modem transmitting player actions for thousands of units. It'd be impossible for a client to directly communicate the game state given these bandwidth limitations. Lockstep eased this burden by limiting communication solely to player actions. A common misconception is that this is Lockstep's only benefit, but that's not true. I'd argue its biggest is actually gameplay related. Because each system is expected to run the same simulation at roughly the same time, real-time strategy games don't feature the rubber banding and magical teleports that you see in most other kinds of multiplayer games. These are usually the result of a client guessing the correct state of the game while it waits for a response from the server. Since RTS games run in lockstep, clients never guess what the state of the game is. What you see on your screen is exactly what's currently happening. One of the downsides of that approach is that it depends on deterministic execution of the game simulation by every client. The implication is that the core game logic cannot efficiently make use of multi-core systems because that would run the risk of introducing a race condition. If you relegated something like the unit AI to multiple threads, different computers would very rapidly come to different conclusions about what had happened in a given engagement, and the game would inevitably desynchronize. I pulled another quote from Code of Honor that explains synchronization errors better than I can. Here's Mr. Wyatt once again. A sync bug arises when the two computers simulating the game each choose different answers to the same question, and from there diverge further and further over time. As in time travel movies like Back to the Future, small changes made by the time traveler while in the past lead to entirely different futures. So it was that games of Warcraft would similarly diverge. On my computer, my elvish human archer would see your orcish peon and attack, whereas on your computer the peon would fail to notice the attack and wander off to harvest lumber. With no mechanism to discover or rectify these types of disagreements, our two games would soon be entirely different. Developers in a lockstep architecture resolved this problem by painstakingly identifying sources of desynchronization, and resolving them until all supported configurations run the simulation in the exact same way. Over the past 10 years or so, advances in computing speeds have come disproportionately from better utilization of multiple cores, something that the lockstep architecture prevents StarCraft II from fully leveraging. This is one of the reasons StarCraft is more performance sensitive than other titles, even Blizzard games that tend to run on a wide variety of configurations. Another downside of local simulation is its inherent vulnerability to cheating. Each client executes the entire game simulation, meaning that each client knows what every other client is doing. The user interface does its best to only show you what you're supposed to be able to see, but that's always going to be an imperfect solution. Somewhere on your computer your opponent's actions are being executed. As long as your game client is expected to understand and simulate them, they're vulnerable to attack. Map hacks are therefore inevitable from an engineering perspective. Blizzard opted to solve this by using another approach. They simply sued the creators of this kind of software. Alrighty folks, we're nearing the end here. We've discussed practically everything I wanted to touch on in this series. Before I wrap up, I wanted to point out that there are two topics I specifically chose not to talk about: map design and matchmaking. I wrote 2 long and detailed articles on these subjects. I didn't want to simply paraphrase them in order to pad out the length of this series. If you're interested, you'll find links in the description below. I'd like to close this series by discussing the legacy of StarCraft II. I'd argue the title accomplished 2 important things in the context of the overall genre. The first, which we spent the majority of this series discussing, is a sustainable design direction for modern-style competitive RTS games. StarCraft II bridged the gap between old-school traditional RTS and the tastes of modern gamers. It showed that RTS games didn't need to become MOBAs or large-scale strategy games to produce compelling gameplay. It streamlined mechanics like poor pathing and AI, but did so without alienating its core audience or sacrificing its dream of building a viable esport. The second accomplishment is more subtle, but just as important. The phenomenal and long-lasting success of StarCraft II proved that the genre is still commercially viable. It still amazes me how successful this game has been. It's unheard of for a competitive RTS to have nearly 300,000 active ladder players more than 7 years after its release. The sales numbers and player data speak for themselves. The RTS audience loves this game, and that's a powerful message to any game designers looking to enter this genre. If this design commentary series accomplished anything, I hope it at least convinced you that this is the result of solid game design, and not some freak accident. To close things out, I thought I'd offer one last quote from Dustin Browder, discussing the team's vision for StarCraft II. Well, what we're trying to do is create a game that harkens back to the legacy of the original. We felt the original was such a strong game that we didn't want to run off and abandon it and do whatever. We wanted it to feel like you were coming home to a game that you knew and loved. At the same time, we're trying to create all new gameplay elements, trying to create a gameplay experience that still has as much learning for you as the original StarCraft and the original Brood War did. You feel like you have to expand your mind, try new stuff, you get a chance to be creative, and you might be able to discover something no one's ever seen before. I really appreciate everyone who stuck with me over the past 8 episodes. If you enjoyed this series, I'd love it if you followed me here, or on Twitter and Facebook to receive regular content updates. The relevant links are in the description below. Thank you once again, and I hope to see you next time.